Welcome to NarrativeNook audio tales where enchanted stories come to life. If you enjoy our stories, please subscribe, like and share to support our channel. Enjoy listening. Roxanne stood outside the kindergarten for some time before she could recover from her trance. Putting away the tickets, she got into her car and headed back to the research institute. Just as she arrived at the office, Jack gave her a call. "The date has been decided, it's tonight. Is that fine with you?" Hearing those words, Roxanne, whose mind was still in a mess, was slightly taken aback. It took her some time before she recalled what Jack had said when he had come over yesterday. "We're probably going to meet those doctors we're collaborating with tonight." On the other end, after not getting an answer from her, Jack urged, "Ms. Jarvis? Is anything the matter? Is that not an appropriate timing?" Only then did Roxanne snap out of her thoughts. "It's nothing. I'm free. I'll arrive on time tonight." Though Jack found her reaction a little strange, he did not probe further since they were holding the conversation over the phone. He merely left her some reminders before concluding the call. Because of the incident that morning, Roxanne seemed to be absent-minded for the rest of the day. Later that afternoon, Roxanne ended work about 30 minutes earlier since she had the banquet to attend that night. Out of respect for the doctors, she wanted to return home to freshen herself up. Just as she was ready to leave her house since it was about time, she received a call from Larry. "Where are you?" Larry's voice sounded. The second the call connected, Roxanne was baffled. "At home." "What is it?" Larry chuckled. "I'll go and pick you up." Comprehension dawned on Roxanne after she heard his words. Larry is probably also one of the doctors we'll be working with this time. Recognizing that possibility, she pulled a smile and turned him down. "No need. I'll head over myself. See you at the banquet later." "Are you sure? I heard from Mr. Damaris that you hurt your foot." Jack had casually mentioned it to him while they were discussing collaboration matters 2 days ago. Larry had intended to visit Roxanne, but he had not been able to make time for it. Learning that she would be attending the banquet that night as well, Larry thus proposed to pick her up as he was afraid it would be inconvenient for her to move around with her injury. "You don't have to worry, Larry." Hearing her response, Larry did not insist any further and agreed to it. By the time the call ended, it was almost time. Roxanne headed downstairs and drove toward the banquet venue. Larry and Jack were chatting away at the entrance of the venue after their arrival. When they saw Roxanne's appearance, they immediately halted their conversation and approached her with that warm smile. "Hello, Larry." "Hello, Mr. Damaris," greeted Roxanne with a smile. Jack nodded gently as a form of acknowledgement. On the other hand, Larry began a brief chat with her, possibly because he had not met her for some time. "I heard you hurt your foot. I wanted to visit you, but I couldn't find the time to do so." Unbothered by that, Roxanne smiled as she replied, "It's only a small injury. Besides, I've recovered now. I'll feel bad if my injury impedes your work." The two looked at each other and smiled. Standing at one side, Jack called out to them after seeing guests arriving one after the other. "Let's head inside first. Everyone's almost here." The two agreed and followed Jack into the banquet hall. As soon as the three stepped inside, everyone in the hall instantly directed their gazes toward them. There were 2 reasons for the crowd's behavior. One was that Jack was the official host, and 2 was the stark contrast between Roxanne and Larry's age as compared to the rest of the attendees. As much as they had outstanding visuals and demeanor, what truly mattered in the traditional medical community was usually one's experience and qualifications. In any case, their attendance at the banquet was just simply jarring and odd. Not many doctors were here at the event this time, but there were still slightly above a dozen. With one glance, Roxanne could recognize a few of them who had also attended the previous medical consultation with her. She hadn't met the others yet, but given that the Damaris family acknowledged them enough to work with them, they were certainly not to be trifled with. Thus, Roxanne smiled at the group politely to express her goodwill. "Who are these two, Mr. Damaris?" someone suddenly asked, standing up. "Will they also be working with us this time?" There was a hint of doubt in that person's voice. Although Roxanne had long grown accustomed to such skepticism, she still couldn't help but tense up immediately upon hearing that. They were now on Jack's turf, and she was worried about her credentials causing him unnecessary trouble. What if people lose their trust in the Damaris family because of us? At the thought of this, the woman's expression became increasingly meek. Yet Jack turned to the person posing the question and said, "This is Dr. Jarvis, and this is Dr. Morrison. They'll be working with us too, so I hope you can all get along with each other." Hearing that, the crowd gasped and stared at both Roxanne and Larry dubiously, especially with regard to the woman. Noticing those looks of uncertainty, Jack turned to Roxanne and Larry, using his eyes to ask if he needed to explain on their behalf. The two merely smiled and shook their heads. Given that the other doctors were more senior, it was only normal for them to question those who were less experienced or well-known. A few words certainly weren't going to change their opinions. With that, Jack simply explained to the two, "These are the doctors who were involved in the last medical consultation with the Damaris family. Some of them took part in consultations in other regions, so you may not have met them yet." Roxanne and Larry nodded. "Oh well, now that everyone's here, let's all have a seat and begin our discussion," Jack announced, turning to the other doctors. The group readily agreed. Despite his young age, Jack sat at the head of the table, whereas the other doctors were to be seated next to him in the order of their qualifications. Roxanne and Larry walked to the seats across from Jack. "Dr. Jarvis and Dr. Morrison, you guys sit over here," Jack suddenly called out to them when they were just about to take their seats. The crowd was instantly taken aback. Roxanne was about to turn Jack down, only to see the doctor next to him having already given up his own seat for her. Upon taking a closer look, she realized it was Daniel Hopp, a doctor who had taken part in the previous medical consultation with her and Larry. Perhaps the other doctors weren't aware, but Daniel now knew how well-versed the two were in the field of medicine, and so he accepted that they were indeed worthy of sitting next to Jack. The remaining group members were visibly perplexed, but seeing a doctor of such a high caliber as Daniel give up his seat, they could only make room for the two young practitioners. Roxanne and Larry exchanged glances. Realizing that they would only look ungrateful by rejecting Jack's offer, they walked toward him and sat to his left and right respectively under everyone's gazes. "I've looked into the acupuncture treatment you performed during the previous consultation, but there are some things about it that I still don't understand. Would you be so kind as to spare me some time to talk about it after this banquet?" Daniel spoke softly, but everyone at the table could hear him. They were struck with awe when they heard him ask Roxanne for guidance. Of course, Roxanne had clearly heard Daniel's question too, and she couldn't help but freeze momentarily before glancing at the other doctors seated around her. As expected, everyone was staring at her in shock and bewilderment. The woman then turned back to Daniel and smiled modestly. "You're being so courteous, Dr. Hopp. I just so happen to know some unorthodox treatment methods out of pure coincidence. It's an absolute honor that you're interested. I've seen what you're capable of with my own eyes, Dr. Jarvis," Daniel said. "It's definitely got nothing to do with coincidences or luck. You don't have to be so modest." Roxanne wanted to respond politely, but Jack cut them off with a smile. "Let's save that for after the banquet, shall we, Dr. Jarvis and Dr. Hopp? It's time to get down to business." Roxanne could only hold her tongue and nod at Daniel in appreciation. She and Daniel initially didn't get along at the start of the last medical consultation, but the man eventually exhibited the true characteristics of an outstanding traditional medicine practitioner. Hence, their relationship grew amicable after the consultation. Roxanne had thought she wouldn't see him again, but clearly she was mistaken. He even saved me from all this awkwardness when I didn't ask him to. Noticing her gratitude, Daniel shot her a friendly smile before turning away and waiting for Jack to speak. The entire banquet fell into silence for a brief moment. The crowd's gazes fell on Jack and the two doctors beside him. All the people here were well-known doctors across China. They had taken the time to attend this banquet out of respect for the Damaris family and also because they truly felt the project was important. Regarding the project itself, Jack had only discussed it with a few doctors in the past, although most of them only had a slight gist of the situation. That was why they now looked forward to hearing more from Jack. At the same time, they were just as curious about who the two doctors seated next to him were. Even Dr. Hop treats this woman with so much respect, and Mr. Damaris seems really friendly with them. Who on earth could they be? Jack glanced at every audience member before opening his mouth. I believe you all know the reason behind this banquet. Everyone seated here will be a crucial ally to the Damaris family, so let's start off with a toast. In response, everyone raised their glasses. Jack chugged his drink before continuing. Given how many years of experience all of you have, I'm sure you're aware of what it means to be a practitioner of medicine. A doctor helps the weak, saves the dying, and gives people hope. That is all there is to it. One who chooses this path should never expect anything in return. All the doctors glanced at each other resolutely. Expect nothing in return, they all chimed in. And that's precisely why the Damaris family started this project, Jack declared with a raised voice. It's our honor to be able to gain your support, and we'll be sure not to let you down. In light of this project, my family has decided to release our collection of books with the hope that they will further assist everyone in expanding their research in traditional medicine. Let us work together to unearth China's rich medical philosophy and make traditional medicine well known across the globe. Emotion swirled within the hearts of every audience member, and their expressions turned grave. Everyone looked visibly excited at the mention of the Damaris family disclosing its books. The atmosphere of the banquet reached an all-time high thanks to Jack's speech, and all the attention was now on him. Even those who hadn't joined him and the other doctors previously had long heard rumors about how exceptional he was in both wisdom and elegance. There were some among the crowd who were initially unconvinced given how much younger Jack was compared to them, but they had still chosen to show up since he was a member of the Damaris family. Yet, they now finally began to let go of their preconceived judgments after hearing what he had to say. They also felt increasingly assured about the two young doctors sitting next to him. He doesn't look like the kind who'll let them sit next to him just because he's close to them. On another note, I apologize for my oversight. Allow me to reintroduce these two seated next to me. Jack's voice rang out again in the midst of the audience's puzzlement. Everyone's gazes then fell on Roxanne and Larry once more. The two of them eyed Jack instead, unsure of what he was about to say. The latter flashed them a smile before turning to the audience. All of you seated here are basically taking part in the project initiated by my family's research institute. This lady next to me is Roxanne Jarvis. Dr. Jarvis is an exemplary student of Professor Harvey Lambert. She came back to China under his advice to manage VR Research Institute, and she'll also be one of the few working with the Damaris family this time around. Then, Jack began to introduce Larry. I'm sure you've all heard of Dr. Larry Morrison. Not only is he the heir of the Morrison family, but he's also made great accomplishments in the field of medicine, and is known for this internationally. With his participation, we'll be receiving financial support from the Morrison family too. As soon as Jack's words fell, all the doubt in the crowd's eyes vanished and was now replaced with astonishment and veneration. While not many people had heard of Roxanne, Harvey was considered a legend. The fact that he had asked this student of his to manage a research institute on her own showed how highly he regarded her. That was also a testament to her abilities. As for Larry, most members of the audience had heard of him but had never had the chance to see him in person. No one had expected two youngsters who looked like they came from distinguished backgrounds to possess such capabilities. It's no wonder even Dr. Hop asked for her advice. Yet, Roxanne and Larry had no intention of showing off, and they remained humble in the face of all these elders. When Jack was done introducing them, the two stood up and addressed the crowd. I hope we can all get along, and please feel free to correct us if we make any mistakes." The other doctors sighed in amazement at their modesty. I had the privilege of working with them during the previous consultation, and I dare say that the future of medicine in Chronicles sure looks promising with people like them around. As the person who had spent the longest time with Roxanne and Larry, Daniel couldn't help but rise and speak up for them in admiration. The crowd nodded in agreement. "Dr. Jarvis, Dr. Morrison, please excuse my rudeness from before. I hope you won't take it to heart," as someone apologized. The two youngsters beamed. "Not at all. We're young, so it's only natural that you have your doubts." More people began to express their amity toward Roxanne and Larry. It wasn't long before the ambience of the room grew harmonious and relaxed. Jack waited a while longer, and after seeing Roxanne and Larry return to their seats, he began to introduce the other doctors. Every figure here had some achievements in the medical field, so a mere mention of his or her was more than sufficient. Soon, everyone felt nothing but respect for one another, not to mention the anticipation of their upcoming collaboration. Now that official talks were out of the way, the audience moved to light-hearted topics, striking up conversations with those they were well acquainted with. Despite not being a fan of socializing, Jack took the lead and headed to the middle of the crowd with a wine glass in hand. Roxanne and Larry clinked glasses with all the elders there before returning to their seats. "It looks like the collaboration will go well," Larry commented, grinning. Roxanne nodded in response and shot a glance at Jack, who was among the crowd. The man deserved all the credit for creating such a lovely atmosphere. "I thought he was just a good doctor. I didn't think he'd make such a capable leader too. Then again, it's no surprise. If the future heir of the great Damaris family can't even control a crowd like this, there's no way old Mr. Damaris would ever approve of him." Just as everyone chatted away happily, the door to the banquet hall suddenly flew open. The crowd instinctively looked toward the entrance, only to watch a group of young, aristocratic women make their way in. The one in the lead wore a long, pure white off-shoulder fishtail dress. At a quick glance, one wouldn't be able to tell if she was a real classy lady or just trying to be one. Jack. What a coincidence." The woman greeted coyly, striding over to Jack. Indeed, Jessica," Jack replied with a polite smile. The Damaris family shared good relations with the Hightowers. Jessica Hightower, the eldest daughter of her family, was 2 years older than Jack. The two had been getting along fairly well in recent years. Even so, Jack was slightly displeased to see her barge in like this with her clique. This was a banquet for the Damaris family's future allies, after all. It was also an event held for official business. Hence, Jessica's arrival was rather untimely. Despite that, the man kept these thoughts to himself. This is?" Someone asked in confusion. Jack composed himself and introduced the woman nonchalantly. "This is Jessica Hightower. She's the heiress of the Hightower family." With a grin, Jessica waved at the audience. "I just so happened to be having a party with my girls next door and heard that Jack was here, so I thought I'd drop by to say hi. I hope I'm not being a bother." Seeing that she knew Jack and learning from their prior experience with Roxanne and Larry, the crowd broke into a wide smile, not daring to mistreat this woman. Suddenly, someone nudged Jessica, signaling her to look in Roxanne's direction.
Jessica's face clouded over instantly. What is such a pretty girl like her doing here? And it looks like she's sitting right next to Jack too.
If you're fine with it, can we join you? Jessica slowly looked away from Roxanne and smiled at the others. Upon hearing that, the people shared a look with each other. They were already done talking about the main topic, and the woman was close to Jack, so they could not possibly reject her. The people nodded at Jack to gesture to him that they did not mind. Seeing that, Jack had no choice but to agree to it. Join us then. He then asked the server to add another seat. Jessica headed straight for the space that Jack had made. Then, as if finally seeing Roxanne, she glanced at Roxanne with a shocked expression before turning to look at Jack in confusion. Is this lady with you? Jack nodded in affirmation. This is Dr. Jarvis. Roxanne did not know what Jessica was thinking about. She thought Jessica was doubting her abilities like the other doctors, so she smiled and greeted, "You can just call me Dr. Jarvis." Jessica gave her a once-over. When she noticed Roxanne's exceptional appearance and thought about how Roxanne was in the same industry as Jack, as well as how Jack was friendly with her, a hint of animosity flashed past Jessica's eyes. Still, she gave Roxanne a faint smile and said, "You're impressive, Dr. Jarvis. You're young, but you're already working with the big shots in the medical world." Roxanne pressed her lips together and flashed Jessica a humble smile. "I'm just lucky." When the server brought a chair over, Jessica did not budge from between Roxanne's and Jack's seats. There was no telling if she was doing that intentionally or not. Roxanne did not think much about it as she stood up and moved her chair to give space for Jessica. Jessica curled her lips and took her seat beside Jack's without hesitation. She then raised her head to look at Jack, who was still chatting away with the others with admiration in her eyes. Jack did not notice the subtle happenings at the side. He was too preoccupied with toasting the other doctors. Jack has been outstanding since he was young, but due to the Damaris family's rules, he rarely interacts with girls. "The only exception is me, who grew up with him," Jessica mentioned in deliberate nonchalance. However, Roxanne was the only one who could hear what she said. Confusion danced across Roxanne's mind when she heard the other woman's words. But still, for the sake of politeness, she smiled and replied, "You must be close to Mr. Damaris, then." Jessica turned to give her a look. Roxanne continued to smile at her sincerely. At the sight of that, Jessica furrowed her brows and continued dubiously, "How did you get to know Jack?" Roxanne confessed, "Old Mr. Queen recommended me to the Damaris family's medical consultation the other time, so I had the pleasure to aid the children with Mr. Damaris." Jessica's heart sank again when she heard that. The Hightower family was also involved in the medical world, but the medical skills she had were not enough to gain her a chance to attend the medical consultation with Jack. Nevertheless, Jessica knew well the processes involved in the Damaris family's medical consultation. Therefore, she could imagine how close the two had been upon hearing Roxanne's answer. "Is that so? It seems that you're much more skillful than I thought if you could attend the medical consultation with Jack." Jessica praised unwillingly. "Jack must think well of you." Roxanne could sense something amiss, and for a moment she did not know how to answer Jessica. No matter what she said in response to Jessica's words, it would seem as if her relationship with Jack was a romantically ambiguous one.
Mr. Damaris surely isn't the only one who wanted her to join them. Roxanne had old Mr. Damaris' approval too, uttered Larry, who had been paying attention to their interaction, when he saw that Roxanne was stumped. At that, Jessica knitted her brows and turned to the side to look at him. She had already noticed the young man a while ago. He was outstanding, but she was not interested in him. Yet, to her surprise, the man had actually forced himself into her line of sight and even defended Roxanne. Jessica started, frowning. Larry introduced himself politely. I'm Larry Morrison. I'm just an ordinary doctor, so you don't need to remember me. Shock flitted past Jessica's eyes. Larry was the son of the Morrison family, and everyone within the circle would have heard about him. They knew that he was uninterested in his family's fortune and had established a place for himself in the medical world. It was rare to spot Larry in banquets in Horrington over the years. Therefore, it was Jessica's first time seeing him in person. She could not help but think that he lived up to his name. Even though he was the son of the Morrison family, he seemed calm and collected and not at all aggressive. Perhaps his many years of practicing medicine were what made him learn to keep his aggression away from his exterior. When Jessica came back to her senses, she promptly smiled and greeted Larry in return. So you're Mr. Morrison. I've heard of you since a long time ago. Larry nodded. Or if there's nothing else, Miss Hightower, I'd like to have a chat with Dr. Jarvis. Before Jessica could respond to that, Larry had already turned to Roxanne. Are you free, Dr. Jarvis? There are some things about medical practices that I'd like to discuss with you. Even Roxanne could not help but freeze for a moment. Although she knew that Larry was doing that to help her get out of her tough spot, it was the first time she had ever heard Larry speak to her in such a distant tone. Still, Roxanne managed to recollect herself quickly and smiled at Larry. Okay. She then cast Jessica an apologetic look. Excuse me, Miss Hightower. Jessica could only give Roxanne a small smile before watching Roxanne walk over to sit down beside Larry. The moment Roxanne sat down, she breathed out a heavy sigh and gave Larry a grateful smile. In a soft voice, she said, Thank you, Larry. Larry sighed as well. Be careful in a while. Miss Hightower seems to have misunderstood something. Roxanne nodded in agreement. She did not know what she had done to make Jessica develop those unnecessary misunderstandings, but Jessica already had those misunderstandings, and it was not something Roxanne could clarify swiftly in a few words. All she could do was tell Jack about it later so that the man could explain it to Jessica himself. When the other medical professionals saw Roxanne and Larry sitting together, they quickly crowded over to discuss questions about medical practices. Both Larry and Roxanne were well established in the medical world, and both had come back from overseas. Although the two of them to keep at low profile in their discussion, the things they said still piqued most people's interest. At the same time, the other doctors were willingly imparting their own experiences to the two. The people became closer after a discussion. The doctors found themselves admiring Roxanne more and more. Furthermore, they, too, began approving of what Daniel had said at the beginning, that the future of the medical field in Chronicles was promising. Jessica's wariness toward Roxanne grew intense as she listened to the people sing Roxanne's praises.
There had been no other women around Jack other than her for all these years. Even though she was 2 years older than Jack, Jessica was already thinking of herself as Jack's future wife until she encountered Roxanne. The more Jessica saw others compliment Roxanne, the more she couldn't stay seated. After scanning her surroundings and seeing that Jack was on the other side toasting to the doctors, Jessica filled a glass of wine for herself and walked over. "Jack, are you not done yet?" Jessica said as she walked over to Jack, as if telling the others that he was hers. The women at the side cooed. Jack was in the middle of talking about professional matters with the others when he was suddenly interrupted by Jessica. Instantly the smile on his face faded. "I still need a little longer. If you're bored, you can head back with the other girls first. Once I'm done, I'll come and visit you." It was a subtle way of asking her to leave. Displeasure rose in Jessica's heart, but she still smiled and moved closer to him. Then she raised her glass and looked at the other doctors at the table. "You're all Jack's seniors. As someone close to him, I have to give you a toast. Please allow me to do so." With that, Jessica downed the glass of wine. The entire time she acted as if she was the lady of Jack's household. The doctors exchanged a look. Despite how baffled they felt, they still politely took a sip from their glasses. Jessica beamed with satisfaction and took the opportunity to stay by Jack's side. When the other women saw how intimate Jack and Jessica seemed, they cheered again. However, Jack realized that he could not continue after the interruption anymore. Hence, he said to the other doctors apologetically, "Let's talk about the details another day. It's getting late now. Let's head back earlier after the merry meal." The others agreed to it. Jack turned to glance at the person beside him and frowned. He then suppressed the displeasure in his heart and brought Jessica back to their seats. Just as he sat down in his seat, he noticed the changes at his table and his frown deepened. "Why is Dr. Jarvis on the other side now?" Jack asked despite knowing the answer. Roxanne stiffened and subconsciously glimpsed at Jessica. Before she could say anything, Jessica uttered, "Mr. Morrison said that he had something to talk to Dr. Jarvis about, so Dr. Jarvis went over." Then, with deliberate generosity, she added, "Dr. Jarvis, I think Jack has something to say to you. Come over and sit here. I'll just sit at the side." Despite her words, she remained seated with no intention of standing up. Roxanne smiled. "I'm fine sitting here. I get to chat with my seniors better here." However, Jack furrowed his brows and said, "Indeed, I have something to talk to Dr. Jarvis about. Jessica, I'll have to trouble you to move." Jessica had interrupted his event without regard to the situation, and Jack had tolerated her actions twice. He was not going to let her do as she pleased anymore. Both Roxanne and Jessica were taken aback by his words. In fact, Jessica had never thought that Jack would actually drive her away. On the other hand, Roxanne was frozen in her spot because she could sense that Jack was trying to use her as an excuse to get rid of Jessica. For a moment, the atmosphere in the room became tense. Jack turned to Jessica, who was still sitting beside him, expressionlessly. The moment her eyes met with his, Jessica gritted her teeth and stood up to give up the seat to Roxanne. Roxanne had no choice but to walk over.
"Mr. Damaris, what do you want to say to me?" Roxanne asked after taking a seat beside him. She genuinely did not want to cause a scene, and Jessica, who was beside her, was staring at her. If Jack could not come out with any topic, Roxanne was certain that Jessica's stare would burn a hole in her. Jack knew well what kind of situation she was in, so he said casually, "I will be relying on both you and Mr. Morrison for this collaboration, so let me express my thanks first." With that, he raised his glass and downed it. Roxanne lifted her glass politely and took a few sips as well. Jessica, where did that woman come from? Why does it seem that Mr. Damaris thinks of her as someone important? As she's not in some kind of relationship with Mr. Damaris, right? She looks like someone who knows how to seduce men." The friends Jessica had brought along with her all grumbled about Roxanne and whispered their speculations to Jessica when they saw the way Jack treated Roxanne. Jessica already felt threatened by Roxanne, so when she heard her friends' flame-fanning comments, her frustration worsened. "It seems that you're quite the crucial person for this collaboration, Dr. Jarvis," Jessica said through gritted teeth and raised her glass. "I'll have to thank you on behalf of Jack, then. I hope you have a good time working with him." She lifted her head to down the drink, but Jack stopped her with a frown. There's no need for this. Dr. Jarvis and I know each other, so I can thank her myself," uttered Jack as he stared at Jessica coldly. Jack could not claim that he did not know what was in Jessica's mind, but their families were on good terms, so he had never voiced anything out loud as he maintained a good relationship with her in public. However, Jack could not stand how Jessica was not reading the room at all anymore. Jessica could barely keep the smile on her face upon hearing Jack's words, and she paled. The ones near them could hear what Jack was trying to imply, that Roxanne was closer to him. Jessica, in contrast, was nothing but a clown. As a matter of fact, Jessica's hand, which had been holding onto the glass of wine, froze midair when she heard Jack's words. An awkward silence ensued. Roxanne was caught between the two, and she could feel her head aching. In the end, Roxanne could not bear to watch Jessica's embarrassed look. She said, "You're at the end of the day, we'll all have to put in much effort for this collaboration since it's our work, so let's toast to that." Hearing that, the others agreed and raised their glass to drink. Jessica took the chance to take a sip before putting her glass back in its original spot. "It seems that you'll be getting right into business after this, so my friends and I will take our leave first." The pale-faced Jessica stood up. She then lowered her head to look at Roxanne. Dr. Jarvis, there's something I want to talk to you about. Do you mind sending us to the door?" Roxanne was perplexed by her question, but there was no reason for her to reject Jessica, so she stood up and followed them to the doorway. "Miss Hightower, what would you like to talk about?" Jessica swept her gaze at the people at the table before turning back to Roxanne. Despite the smile on her face, her tone was cold. "You don't assume that I'll thank you for helping me out of the awkward situation just now. I'm warning you now to stay away from Jack." Her words brought a frown to Roxanne's face. She had never expected to cross someone at a work-related banquet. Roxanne had been as friendly as she could be, but Jessica's animosity toward her had only increased. Sensing Jessica's animosity, Jessica pursed her lips and muttered, I think you've misunderstood something. I only believe what I see, so it's best for you to remember what I've said." Before Roxanne could say anything else, Jessica turned and left. Exasperation washed over Roxanne, and she turned to return to her seat. Sorry. Did I cause you any trouble?" Jack started apologetically when Roxanne sat down. I hope you won't use me as a shield if you encounter something like this next time. There are already some misunderstandings between Miss Hightower and me. I think she and I have some misunderstandings too. Otherwise, she would not have acted as if she was his girlfriend earlier. If not for their families, Jack would have confronted her about the matter a long time ago. Still, don't worry about this. I'll clarify things with her once I get back. I won't let her trouble you anymore. Jack added after a short moment of contemplation. Roxanne nodded. She was not too fazed by the matter. She did not know why, but she pitied Jack for meeting a woman like Jessica. However, the thought of Aubrey soon crossed her mind. Here, she had Jack to clarify things with Jessica, and it was not as if she was guilty in the first place. On the other hand, Aubrey still had her eyes on her. She was going to strike anytime, and Roxanne could only do so much to defend herself from Aubrey. Roxanne realized that perhaps she was the more pitiful one. A bitter look crept upon Roxanne's face without her knowledge. What's the matter? Is there something else?" Jack asked, puzzled. Roxanne snapped back to her senses and shrugged her emotions away before flashing Jack a smile. It's nothing. I just find what happened today a little funny." Jack apologized to her again. Without Jessica and her group of women, the atmosphere in the room was much more relaxed. After having their meal in peace, everyone went back home. Roxanne and the other two had been forced to drink quite a bit by their seniors, so they could not drive themselves back. While Larry and Jack summoned their drivers, Roxanne planned to hail a cab home. The three of them went out of the hotel together. Roxanne, let me send you home." "I don't think you can hail a cab at this time," Larry suggested. Roxanne gave him a smile. It's fine. I can head home myself. It's late, and it's convenient for you to fetch me back. Your parents will be worried if you reach home late." Larry sighed. I'm not a kid anymore, so why are they still worried about me? You, on the other hand, will have Archie and Benny worrying about you if you reach home late." The look in Roxanne's eyes turned tender when she thought about her children. At that moment, the warm lights by the hotel doorway shining on her gave her a gentler appearance. That was the sight Jack was greeted with when he turned to say something to them. He felt as if the sight of Roxanne had shot an arrow into his heart, and he could not help but gulp. In fact, he had even forgotten what he wanted to say to them. I'll just give them heads up later. It's late, so it's best for me not to trouble you." Larry Roxanne rejected with a chuckle. Larry's gaze darkened. He knew that she would not be easily convinced, so he had no choice but to give up. I will wait here with you for a while, then. It's late, and I'm worried about leaving you here alone. Roxanne assented with a smile.
Thank you for listening. If you have enjoyed this story, please like and share so others can see it too. Also hit the subscription button and notification bell so you can be notified on our next release. Thank you for your support. God bless you.